Hi, and thank you for joining us for making the most of your science standardized test data, analysis, and team goal setting. My name is Francis Fidgent, CEO here at KnowAtom. To give you just a bit of quick background on KnowAtom, we're an organization really focused on higher order thinking skills, creative, evaluative, and analytical thinking skills, because we believe that those are among the most important skills that we teach our students. And I myself am a former teacher, high school math teacher, and an elementary and middle school STEM specialist. The focus as an organization on KnowAtom's behalf is really to take a look at where we're going in curriculum and instruction and standardized testing with the next generation science standards, and to also think about ways in which we can help develop those higher order thinking skills in the context of science and engineering. The way that we help schools and districts do that is really to put students in the role of scientist and engineer with their everyday classroom and teachers. And so a lot of our focus is how curriculum materials and professional development are delivered. And so we develop a number of those resources, which you can find on KnowAtom.com. The webinar that we'll be talking through today and these different points is really to take a look at the standardized test sort of evolution that we can expect from where we are at present. If you are in a state like Ohio where there's been some next generation assessments rolled out recently where you were prior to that, and in other cases where you can expect to end up. So we're going to take a look there. I'm going to demonstrate some different state-level platforms to show you the kind of data that's out there. And again, we have so many states, each with their own data platform, that I'm going to pick about half a dozen to take a look at. If you have specific questions about a state that's not covered, feel free. I'm going to give you my contact information. Reach back if for some reason you don't catch the contact information. Feel free to reach out to Mary Ellen or reply to any emails that you have, and somebody will be able to get that question over. Just reference this presentation. Also, as we think through standardized test data, what's past versus future potential, we're going to be looking at not only models of testing, but really models of instruction and how the two connect and sort of the limits of the data and some habits that may already be present in your school or district as a result of the type of testing that's been in place, and some of the considerations that you may want to take into account as you move forward. We're going to look at not only the data from a sort of a macro perspective, but we're going to take a look at where to find clues in the data to inform instruction and also involve your teams. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So the agenda today: how testing is likely to change, current data types and views, random shocks, and so random shocks being sort of external changes, things that are somewhat beyond your control as an educational leader, and then methods for finding meaning in the data, where we will jump out to those state-level platforms and then come back to some strategies that you may want to consider to make using data a little more fun and also less punitive, but more of an investigation. Unfortunately, the standardized test data oftentimes has sort of a stigma around it, because as teachers we think of it as a evaluation of our ability, not necessarily a clue into many of the factors that influence student performance. So let's jump right in. Before we can really talk about testing, we have to think about the change that is occurring in terms of next generation science standards. Next generation science standards take science and engineering instruction to the next level. Now, many states have not really involved engineering in the discussion of K-12 science. Now engineering's there. It's an application of science. It shouldn't be something that causes you great anxiety, because the reality is that if you have solid inquiry practice skills built in your students, and they have an understanding of how to apply those skills in the context of the scientific process, learning an engineering design process is really not a big deal. In fact, engineering is merely applying scientific knowledge to solve, well, identify and solve problems through the development of a prototype and the testing of a prototype, gathering data, and forming a conclusion about it. So that's how engineers give us new technology. So under the Next Generation Science Standards, we have a clear definition of what engineering is. We also have a clear definition of what science is. Scientists ask questions, and they find answers to those questions through hypothesis testing. So by forming a question, they also form hypotheses, and then they develop experiments to test those hypotheses. As a result of the testing, there's data that can be analyzed, and then key data as a result of that analysis can be used to support a claim about the hypothesis, whether it's valid, supported, or not supported, true or false, or even inconclusive. So that's how scientists give us new scientific knowledge. And so as a result of this evolution of next generation science standards, science and engineering, as you see on your screen, sort of form this cycle. It's a synergy, really, where scientists are asking questions and carrying out experiments, gathering data, forming conclusions, and producing scientific knowledge. Engineers are using that scientific knowledge, identifying problems, developing prototypes that are potential solutions to those problems, testing them, gathering data, and then deciding whether to refine or replicate those prototypes. And that is technology. And of course it goes full circle because, well, the technology then helps scientists ask new and deeper questions or test new and deeper hypotheses. Or even as science evolves, engineers are able to refine technologies, sort of going from glass bottles to plastic bottles would be an example of that. So math is at the center of everything because math is a tool for quantifying and also analyzing and communicating the observations and results of experiments and prototype tests. But also it's a tool for being specific, for analyzing, for using key data or being able to develop key data that is used to be persuasive in terms of a evidence-based argument. So math is at the center of it all and really allows science and engineering to be replicable and clearly understood. So we're going to dive into this a little bit deeper in a second, but you have to understand that most states have not had this level of definition around science and engineering and this idea of a STEM cycle, which is really at the root of the Next Generation Science Standards all the way back to the early research carried out by the National Research Council, National Academies of Science and Engineering, National Institute of Health, and so on. Now, when you look at the Next Generation Science Standards themselves, you have to understand that they aren't standards in the sense of a traditional standard that most people are used to. The traditional standard most people are used to are really focus at fact recall. So the idea that a student will be able to identify a sedimentary, igneous, and metamorphic rock. So it's very recall oriented. If a student can recall layers in a rock, they can look at a layered rock and say, that's a sedimentary rock. Or if they understand that magma cooling is going to produce igneous rock. Very, very simple sort of one-to-one, asking for a fact, regurgitating a fact. Under the Next Generation Science Standards, the standards are performance expectations, which means that there's an implication here for standardized assessment. Standardized assessment is going to have to involve, next generation standardized assessment is going to have to involve a performance-based test and performance of skills, content, and systems thinking in the context of the performance expectation. So what you see here in white is the performance expectation. Students will have to be able to demonstrate as a result of what they've learned in the classroom, as a result of instruction, that they can develop a model to describe the movement of matter among plants, animals, decomposers, and the environment. That performance expectation is going to have to be performed in a context. So the classroom has to provide context for students to perform expectations, to actually learn the 3 dimensions, which is what you see below here. The standardized assessments are going to require students to perform the expectation in a context, something that is related to, but not literally, what was a part of the classroom. And so if those two don't line up, if the classroom is not creating an opportunity to perform and learn the dimensions and perform the expectations, then when it comes test time, that is going to be the reality. So there's going to be a mismatch between the student's experience and instruction and their evaluation. Now these three dimensions, science and engineering practices, you see in blue, disciplinary core ideas you see in orange, and cross-cutting concepts you see in green, are the three dimensions of science and engineering. Blue practices are the skills specific to the discipline. Orange, the disciplinary core ideas, is content, but it's systematic content. It's content that's dynamic. It's not difference between the sedimentary, igneous, and metamorphic rock. It would be more like how, being able to explain how sediment can become igneous and metamorphic rock through interacting with Earth's processes, through weathering, erosion, and transportation of matter in the water cycle. Would be example of sort of the type of content that we see in disciplinary core ideas. Where you look at this example, you'll see just by reading the first line or so that the content here is focusing on food chains and food webs, but a student is going to be expected to know that food of almost any kind of animal can be traced back to plants, that organisms are related in food webs in which some animals eat plants for food and others eat the animals that eat the plants, and so on. So again, not the static fact that there are producers, consumers, primary consumers, tertiary, secondary, so on, but really not the concept in motion. And that's, I think, a very helpful way to think of it, is that disciplinary core ideas under next generation science standards are really concepts in motion. Cross-cutting concepts, which is that third dimension, are the system behaviors which the content reflects. And so the disciplinary core ideas are dynamic, and they're going to link up like puzzle pieces with many other areas of content, and they are going to exhibit behavior that can be described in terms of systems. So in this case, the cross-cutting concepts, systems and system models, they're looking for students to be able to describe not only the components of an ecosystem in the relationships, but really how those interactions occur and the implications of those relationships. Okay, so that's key. Major differences from the way most, especially states with lower level, fact-oriented standards are focused. If you come from a state that has inquiry standards, you're already ahead of the game, because inquiry standards really do get at least the beginnings of science and engineering practices and the beginnings of this systems thinking and more dynamic disciplinary core content. Okay, doesn't mean that you can't get there if you have sort of the old drill and kill model of sort of testing and fact delivery in your state, but it's going to be more of a lift, and we're going to talk about why that happens, especially, unfortunately, in very test-focused, data-focused schools and districts. And we'll take a look at that in a moment. So the traditional model under previous standards for instruction was really the idea that content is out there, and so the content is defined, it's X, Y, Z, and then the teacher is really the conduit for that content. And the teacher in that traditional model would bring the facts forward, model them, demonstrate phenomena, and explain what this idea is, what this fact is all about, maybe how it's connected. The student in that traditional model is required to sort of show their understanding by recalling the facts and repeating the demonstrations, summarizing the phenomena. So if they can do that, they're generally sort of regarded as proficient. They can check the box. They can hand back what was handed to them. Okay, that's the traditional model. The weaknesses here are that I don't care if a teacher is a content specialist or not. Nobody is good at everything. And so that is, a limit there. That people tend to play to things that they like or their strengths, and so curriculum can become a little bit lopsided. The other thing is that students are really observers, and this model is focused on lower level thinking skills, remembering, understanding, and at best applying. Okay. Under the next generation science standards, the real new next generation model for science instruction rearranges the relationship, the sort of triad between teacher, student, and the standards and content and skills. And here's how it plays out. So under the next generation science standards, students develop these practice skills, the science and engineering practice skills, which they use to develop and extend their understanding of the content and the way that content behaves. So those disciplinary core ideas and cross-cutting concepts. The teacher's role is to tune this inquiry environment, because it really is an inquiry environment where they're gradually adjusting supports. They're helping the students understand how to engage appropriately as scientists and engineers, and to redirect and monitor that environment. So redirect individual students, potentially the whole class. So they're helping make progress against the standards, against mastery. Okay. On the student side, it's not about recalling and handing back or mirroring what was given to them. It's really about engaging the content, developing and using it themselves, and being able to demonstrate that. That's why we have performance expectations, to really perform the expectations. And that requires the 3 dimensions, right? So they have to be able to use skills to solve problems and answer questions. That's really the defining line, remember when we looked at that cycle, between science and engineering. Scientists ask questions, they put forward hypotheses and they test them. Engineers use their knowledge of science to identify and solve problems through the development of technology. By the way, technology and the role of engineers is not to build things. They may be building things, but not always. Software is something that's intangible, that is engineered. Processes in manufacturing for quality control are something that's engineered, completely intangible. Okay, medicines are molecules which have certain interactions with other molecules or diseases or microbes. Okay, those are engineered things. So a student needs to really internalize, master those practices, and be able to use them to describe the dynamic interactions between content, and also to understand and be able to work with and describe and use system behavior in that context as well. So there's a major change here in what needs to happen in the classroom so the students are ready with the depth and breadth of exposure that's necessary, but really the skills to perform the expectations. So I have to put this out here and spend some time on it, because if you don't realize this going into the next generation science standards, you're in for a real rude awakening, because there's a new definition of STEM instruction. And this goes all the way back to the National Research Council, published in 2011, and it's a shift from what you see on the left to what you see on the right. On the left, what you see is a teacher who's pre-teaching, modeling, and then the students are going to then take what they've been shown and do it elsewhere again. That's that traditional model. Okay. On the right, these are students who've engaged in nonfiction reading, Socratic dialogue, and they're now in the position of engineers. They are working together using their 21st century skills to collaborate with each other, come up with an understanding of the problem, what they know that's relevant to trying to solve the problem, surveying their available materials, going on to identify ways in which the problem may be solved, choosing an approach from those ways that they've identified, and actually diagramming it, building it, and testing it to produce data to reflect back on the prototype to decide whether or not it actually solves the problem. And so that's very authentic. It's them investing themselves in their learning. It's very student-oriented, and you can see how by internalizing those practice skills, they can then go after a problem and develop and use the skills and develop and use the content in that role, and they're being monitored and redirected by teachers who they're checking in with, or a teacher that they're checking in with, and it's their regular classroom teacher. Okay, so effective STEM instruction, it's worth taking a look at the definition here. Effective STEM instruction capitalizes on students' early interest and experiences. It identifies and builds on what they know, so it's an intentional nurturing process that starts at the earliest levels, pre-K, kindergarten, and follows the students on up. Effective STEM instruction also, and we'll continue with the definition here, provides them with experiences to engage them in the practices. And again, the practices are the skills specific to the discipline, and they are defined in the Next Generation Science Standards. There's no guesswork here. Okay. Again, the Next Generation Science Standards are great at telling us what science and engineering is and what it's not, what the practices are and what they are not. Okay. And also sort of the depth of content and sort of the way these standards are articulated are really designed to help us be able to have curriculum which sustains student interest, that has a depth and breadth that is appropriate and grade level specific as well. Not to say that, and there's a difference between standards and curriculum, which we're not going to go into here. We do have some other presentations on that if you're interested to engage those. Check out our website or feel free to email one of us and we'll send you a link. But nonetheless, if a student is not engaged in the practices and moving through that appropriate scope and sequence, it's again not effective STEM instruction. So on the left, the teacher might be engaged in the practices, the students aren't. On the right, the students most definitely are engaged, so that's quite important. What I wanted to show you as we think about the testing now, so if you think about that environment, again, the switch from traditional on the left to next generation on the right, the classroom environment's making this shift, the testing is as well. Now let's look at some existing testing, and this is from the TIMSS test out of Tufts University, International Math and Science Assessment. And looking back even to 2011, which is where this particular score benchmark is coming from. The reason that we've arrived at Next Generation Science Standards is that the National Academies, National Institute of Health, looked out, basically a decade ago and said, why is it that students are not college and career ready? And where are our students now? And so by looking at this international benchmark from TIMSS, we can kind of get some clues about that, because the best performing students in the United States, or states in the United States, I should say, are performing at about a 565 point level, which is this high international benchmark. But look at what that really represents. Okay, and I'm going to start at the low and work our way up. So at a low level, students who demonstrate knowledge of some simple facts, they interpret simple diagrams, and they complete simple tables, providing short written responses to questions. So if that describes instruction and performance in your district, especially if that describes it at best, you can see that even under the old standards, that's a low level of performance. To go to intermediate, students now are showing some basic knowledge and understanding of practical situations, the ability to interpret information in pictorial diagrams and apply factual knowledge to practical situations. So if we think about Bloom's taxonomy, at the low level, it was that understanding, right? Knowing, being able to remember, to know, okay? At the intermediate level, now we're getting up to, at best, applying. Okay, now let's go to where the best states are performing in the U.S. at this high level. Students are able to explain phenomena, compare, contrast, and make simple inferences and provide brief, descriptive responses. Again, just barely halfway up Bloom's taxonomy here. Students are just able to explain, compare, contrast, make simple inferences. So just the beginnings of analysis is really where the best states in the U.S. and actually Massachusetts on this particular assessment was the top-rated U.S. state. You have to ask, is that college and career ready for STEM or even for non-STEM careers? And really, the National Academies, National Institutes are are basically saying no. So where does it need to go? Well, let's just look up to the next level on this assessment at how they described advanced. Students who were advanced show some knowledge of the process of scientific inquiry, the ability to interpret results in the context of a simple experiment, be able to reason and draw conclusions from descriptions and diagrams, and evaluate and support an argument. So back to Bloom's taxonomy, this is creating, evaluating, and analyzing sort of simultaneously. Yes, it requires remembering and understanding and applying, but those lower level skills aren't sufficient. And in reality, for any college or career, it's these students who have developed higher order thinking skills which are going to be successful as accountants or lawyers or plumbers or physicists or whatever. So the next generation science standards are really pushing students in the learning environment, but also testing environment, to focus on creating, evaluating, and analyzing simultaneously, which is why you see that we've rearranged Bloom's taxonomy here a little bit, which would normally just be 6 levels: remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating, to show that evaluating, creating, and analyzing sort of happen on the same level. Okay? And I want to show you how that takes place. So this is an example. Again, this is not a assessment that was designed specifically for the next generation science standards, but reflects what you can expect next generation science standards to really sort of mirror, or sort of the spirit of what next generation science assessment may be or become. So let's take a look at this. So up top, again, if you are from Park, State, or even Smarter Balance, you will maybe be familiar with some of this model of sort of assessment. Up top, you have a reading passage that puts forward essentially some story, which is like somewhat nonfiction, but then in the red area, the lighter blue, you get sort of a fictional student who puts forward his ideas. And then down the bottom, below the graphs, you'll see that he relates his idea to specific data that's put forward. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So the basics: greenhouse effect, fact or fiction. Living things need energy to survive. The energy that sustains life on Earth comes from the sun, which radiates energy into space because it's too hot. A tiny proportion of that energy reaches Earth, and Earth's atmosphere acts like a protective blanket over the surface of our planet, preventing variations in temperature that would exist in an airless world. Most of the radiated energy coming from the sun passes through the Earth's atmosphere, and the Earth absorbs some of this energy, and some is reflected back from the Earth's surface. Part of this reflected energy is absorbed by the atmosphere, and as a result, the average temperature of Earth's surface is higher than it would be if there were no atmosphere, and so we call this the greenhouse effect. It's become more pronounced during the 20th century, and in fact, the average temperature of Earth's atmosphere has increased. Periodicals about this have referenced carbon dioxide emission as the main source of temperature rise in the 20th century. That's the background students are given, which relates to content, right? And also sort of concepts of systems in the Earth. Can the students use their practice skills and those other 2 dimensions to perform an expectation? Let's see. So a student named Andre becomes interested in the possible relationships between the average temperature of Earth's atmosphere and the carbon dioxide emission on Earth. In a library, he comes across these 2 graphs. Andre concludes from these 2 graphs that it's certain that the increase in the average temperature of the Earth's atmosphere is due to the increase in carbon dioxide emission. Now, this is an assessment. We haven't even been asked a question yet. So let's see. Here are the questions. Question 1, based on the reading, another student, Janine, disagrees with Andre's conclusion. She compares the 2 graphs and says that some parts of the graphs do not support his conclusion. So, as a teacher, we should look at this and say, guess what? The data does not support his conclusion. That's what's being said here. A student is making a scientific argument. Let's go back to his conclusion. and the data. So his conclusion was that the increase in carbon dioxide emissions was the cause of the increase in temperature. Well, that means that when the carbon dioxide emission goes up, that the temperature goes up. But look at this, the carbon dioxide emission doesn't always go up. Look at 1930, it goes down. But yet in 1930, the temperature goes up. So that actually does not support Andre's conclusion, right? If the carbon dioxide emissions going up produces temperatures going up, why does the temperature go up when the carbon dioxide emission doesn't go up? Okay? So that's an example of a part of the graph that doesn't support Andre's conclusion, and a student would have to explain that. Look at the next question. Andre persists in his conclusion that the average temperature rise of Earth's atmosphere is caused by the increase in carbon dioxide emission, but Janine thinks that his conclusion is premature. She says, before accepting this conclusion, you must be sure that other factors that could influence the greenhouse effect are constant. Name one of the factors that Janine means. Now, there's a lot of things that she could mean or could be thinking about. What's one of them? Well, what could influence? Here it talks about the amount of energy that's radiating from the sun and reaching Earth. Is it possible that the amount of energy radiating from the sun and hitting Earth is changing? Is it possible that the amount of energy coming from the sun is actually increasing? Because an increase in that amount of radiation from the sun would mean potentially more energy hitting Earth, which would mean more absorption, okay, which would then translate into more reflection, but also more energy trapped by Earth's atmosphere and an increase in temperature. There are other perhaps more speculative things that could be brought up as well, but that would be a factor. Okay, so again, students being able to think using their practice skills to be able to develop and use what's presented to them, thinking about the content more dynamically and thinking about the actual system nature of how things interact. Again, why that classroom experience is so important, okay? Because this is the type of testing that's coming down the pike. Now, this particular test is aimed at a very early, like 8th grade, 9th grade level, okay? So if you have 8th or 9th graders, you know, you can ask yourself, would they be ready for something like this? If they're not receiving this type of instruction in the classroom, it's most likely a case that they aren't. In the future, we should be thinking about testing taking that form. So instructional practices have to evolve. Let's take a look at the kind of data and what the data and standardized testing really represents right now. It represents basically 4 areas, and these 4 different areas, the data gives us clues about 4 different areas. Okay, the first 3, test design, standards, and student factors, are areas that you don't have a lot of control over. They're things that you can give input in or input to in public comment, in the case of test design or test choice, standards, but those are by and large long political processes, things that you don't have a lot of opportunity to influence on a day-to-day basis. Student factors, you may have a little bit more opportunity here because if you have something like a community school, wraparound services, tight relationship with community organizations, then it's possible that some student factors you may be able to bring resources to or refer out in such a way that student factors are not as reflected in the data that comes back. What you have the most control over is number 4, the instructional factors, and so we're going to take a look at each of these here. All right, test design. So, for instance, test design, multiple choice, open response, hands-on, these are all models of assessment. Multiple choice tends to, in a summative sense, tends to cater to the summative crowd, the fact kind of drill and kill. Open response caters more towards inquiry, students having to at least apply some practices to what was sort of an instance that we just saw where maybe considering a scenario and having to articulate how they either reflect or would handle or what's going on in this scenario in light of what's been posited. Hands-on test designs do exist. There are states, New Hampshire is a good example, that will give hands-on standardized assessments, and students in those environments are actually working collaboratively for parts of the assessment. So it will expose issues with students being used to basically collaborating, being able to use materials appropriately, understanding the expectations in an inquiry environment. Open response will expose issues with students who haven't been taught how to do evidence-based writing, what it means to support an argument with data, how to really think creatively, analytically, or evaluate the claims of others and respond in writing. And multiple choice, of course, is multiple choice. So in that case, if a student has some limitation with time or with some kind of motor skills, then that might expose some issues there. Other clues from a standards perspective: content, inquiry, and systems. So the traditional model of instruction and state standards previous to next generation science standards really focus on content. Some states focus on inquiry. And so if the standards focus on that, then the standardized test has to assess it. And so that's why when you have a change of standards, you have to have a change of assessment. The two are supposed to mirror each other. Now that does not mean that standards are curriculum. Standards are, it's like a health department regulation. Okay, you must clean your coffee pot at least twice a year. That doesn't mean that it's the best idea to only clean your coffee pot twice a year, but it does mean that by doing that, you meet the standard. Okay, so if someone from the health department comes into your coffee shop, you had better be able to show that you have cleaned the coffee pot at least twice a year, as a minimum. Okay, that doesn't mean that that makes for healthy customers, or the healthiest or happiest customers in the coffee shop model. It doesn't mean that meeting the minimum from a standards perspective produces exemplary or advanced level students by any means. It just means that they can get, at best proficient. Inquiry is now a bigger part of the equation. So if you have inquiry standards in your state, you've got a leg up. Systems really comes into play with systems thinking, and also the sort of this interplay between content, practices, and processes, because really practices are skills specific to the discipline, but processes is how you go about answering questions and solving problems as scientists and engineers. So similar to being a writer, if students are going to be in the role of scientist, writers don't just know about vocabulary and word choice and sentence structure. They actually understand how to carry out the writing process, how to pre-write, write, revise, and publish. Okay, basically going from a concept to a finished piece. In the case of science, it's how do you go from a question to a conclusion, which requires designing an experiment, planning it, carrying it out, gathering data. Same thing with engineering. How do you go from a problem to looking at the available resources, developing a prototype, testing it, or creating it, testing it, and then reflecting back on the prototype, using the data to make a recommendation. Okay, evidence-based claims. So this is a movement in the new standards which is going to be reflected in the new data, which is most likely not reflected in your current data. Okay, which, if, as you can imagine, this sort of change is going to be, for some people, something that they really feel and see and may not even be aware of until after that data shows it. Student factors. This is where I said you may have a little bit of opportunity. Performance readiness. So if students aren't getting food, if they aren't sleeping, if they aren't eating appropriately, or if there's something going on health-wise, that affects performance readiness. It affects a student's ability to engage in testing, period, no matter what form. Number two, thankfully, the Obama administration has made an announcement that President Obama would like the the reduction of standardized testing to be part of his legacy, and that really standardized testing shouldn't take more than 2% of time on learning. And so, thumbs up, because people or districts who not only engage in standardized testing, but this sort of model of other adaptive testing and this test and that test, continuous testing, actually promotes decision fatigue. So there is, and what is decision fatigue? It's an actual scientifically documented phenomenon in humans, that and animals too in some cases. We only have a capacity to make so many decisions in a given day or in a given time period, and at some point having to analyze and make decisions over and over and over again in different areas causes us to be fatigued to the point that we make poor decisions despite our ability to make better decisions. And so that's something that we can stand up to, especially when it's outside of something that's state or federally mandated, to reduce the amount of testing and decision fatigue, which will ultimately negatively impact data. Also, social emotional, and this is where students who have parents going through a divorce or have moved, or a loss in the family, or even at a community level, if there's been a community tragedy, these are things that have sort of a social emotional element to them, which can negatively impact data, again, because students are just not in a place to perform their best. So those three areas, test design, standards, student factors, are areas where we just don't have that much control. However, fourth area, instructional factors, is an area where we do have control. We have really complete control. Okay, instructional factors really fall into these three different areas, quality of curriculum being first and foremost, and we'll take a look at that in a second. Quality curriculum isn't just do these 4 standards in the first 3 months of school, and these next 4 standards in the next 3 months, and the rest of them in the last trimester, or these 10 vocabulary words, and here's a PowerPoint, flip through the slides, okay, and just do what you can with that. That is not curriculum. Okay, go and find your own supplements and just do the best you can is not curriculum. Quality curriculum fits the model of quality instruction, okay, of effective STEM instruction that we saw in that definition earlier. It creates, it starts early on as students enter the public education system, pre-K on up. It's something that's intentional September through June, and something that's nurturing in that September through June progression. It's something that's engaging student interest and has an appropriate scope and sequence that's creating momentum. And it's also intentionally nurturing as students progress from pre-K all the way through grade 12, so that the depth of understanding is increasing and the depth of skills is increasing. Okay? And quality isn't just in accuracy or in the accuracy of what's in the curriculum, but it's also in the support for the teacher in understanding where they're going and how they're getting there, in the type of materials that are required and the experiences, and the mapping to the standard specifically, so that it is understanding by design. Okay, that there's explicit instruction of the standards and the content, but in a way that is engaging students in developing and using it and developing those skills and requiring them to engage in higher order thinking. Okay, so the quality of curriculum is the support piece. The quality of instruction is really the delivery of that curriculum, and when we think about those two models, the traditional model being the content flowing through the instructor, placing that aside and having that classroom environment be an inquiry environment where the teacher is adjusting supports, but really the students are in the role of scientist and engineer and engaging by developing and using the content and skills in context. Okay, so that's the quality of instruction, and the quality of the instructional environment is literally the space where that happens. It doesn't mean you need black tabletops and science labs. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about not doing science on Friday afternoon, okay, for 10 minutes or for 30 minutes a week, or for doing science 45 minutes every other week for half the year and then trading off with social studies. That's not a quality instructional environment. Okay, having an environment where the students have all the materials sort of made into little kits and put at their desk, and then somebody shows them what to do and the kids all follow, that's not a quality instructional environment. Okay, quality instructional environment is where science and engineering is infused with the nonfiction reading, with Socratic dialogue, with applications of what's going on in math and in ELA, so that students are developing their plans as nonfiction text, so that they are applying their math skills, and they're doing it in the context of the standards, and then using those science and engineering practice skills over and over and over again all year long in different contexts to extend their understanding. And that's where the battle is won or lost in the data, because schools and districts that really focus on these three areas and pulling them together in the ways I've just described are the ones that perform at the top. And those who try to focus on getting the number to move by whatever means possible oftentimes but they miss the implication of these three areas because they're really trying to understand, okay, if I give more content, if I say it more in a traditional model, if I mirror more, I should get more, and it just doesn't work that way. Okay, so again, just thinking curriculum, professional development materials, all linked together, coming to life in that STEM learning environment. So, I have some pictures from our things up here, which you can download online and take a look at. But when you think about scope and sequence, it's intentional, it's specific, grade level by grade level, okay, unit order specific, and then those resources supporting the teachers, the background, objectives, really explaining how those next generation science standards are coming to life in the unit, specifically in the lessons, what their purpose are. Again, purposeful instruction is what this is all about. Okay, specific vocabulary, that's scaffolding through the year, but also year to year, okay, in such a way that everybody's on the same page. You can't have one classroom referring to water pollution by one definition and the classroom next door or in the building down the street referring to it by a different definition. The larger districts get, if students are coming and going, they're transient, you need curriculum that is going to allow them to be potentially chasing rent or ending up in different school buildings, and yet continuing in that scope and sequence appropriately so that they have a consistent, that they maintain their understanding and with consistent definitions and scope and sequence. Okay, not doing rocks and minerals all year because somebody chooses to do it in September and someone else in October and somebody else in November. Okay, supporting teachers with teacher background with really clear guidance around what goes into a lesson, the specific materials and objectives, prep, discussion. Not something that's scripted that has to be read as a script, but really something that it forms the backbone and the basic meat on the bones for teachers who are new to link up with their peers, understand what's expected of students, and be able to deliver against that. Okay? Again, avoiding systemic gaps, which will appear in the data. Okay, so exemplars, assessments that mirror that sort of model. And again, I'm just clicking through these quickly just to give a concrete visual. And then, of course, nonfiction reading, integrating into other areas of the curriculum, but with content and use of words, vocabulary words, which are consistent with what's being discussed in Socratic dialogue, with the concepts that are interacting within the unit, okay, with Common Core ELA as well as math if you're one of those states, and in such a way that's giving students an opportunity to develop not only practice skills but process skills, like we think of in scientific process, engineering, design process as well. Okay, so think about the factors that you can control and how the data gives you clues to what factors are out of alignment. And unfortunately, because all these factors are intertwined, when something's out of alignment, it has a cascading effect through all those factors. Now, these are the typical stages of proficiency that we look at when we look at standardized test data. Now, these proficiency levels, the wording for your state may vary slightly, but basically, I'm just going to take you through here real quick. There's a segment of no learning data, which is basically students who aren't tested. So they're kind of set aside. Most of the time it's less than 2% or even less than 1% really. These are students who aren't in districts long enough to be tested, have no language skills to the point where they actually can't engage in the test, or some kind of like a social emotional behavior issue or something of that nature, which just prevents them from engaging that year. For students who are tested, the typical 4 categories are something like warning failing, needs improvement, proficient, and advanced, or students with distinction, exemplary. And there's, a rose by another name, but this is the sort of 5 areas. Indexes are generally produced by each state, and those indexes are essentially blurring the line here a little bit. What they tend to look for, so an index is kind of a weighted scoring, that instead of looking at 4 areas, warning, needs improvement, proficient, advanced, what it does is it says, students who have crossed a specific line towards proficiency, and will create a number, usually between 0 and 100, for a school to talk about how well it's performing. Okay? Here's the problem, that these indexes generally put a line between warning failing and needs improvement. That's why I have the red and green on your screen. So what happens is schools who don't focus on the quality of curriculum, instruction, and environment, but really focus on the data, tend to develop practices which push children from warning failing to needs improvement, but do not push them much beyond that. Okay? So what you tend to see is fewer students at warning failing, and then more students at needs improvement, kind of get a glut of students there, and then it starts to trail off. Proficient and advanced start to kind of come down. Why is that? Because a lot of times with things like vocabulary kill, practice drills, practice tests, things like that, students can get a sufficient score to get out of the warning or failing category. But you know what? It's not a sufficient, needs improvement is not sufficient for moving to the next grade. It's not sufficient for college or career readiness. And so what happens is that students are left with a lack of skills, really. They're not developing higher order thinking skills by practicing practice tests or memorizing vocabulary or trying to do a formula of, writing a certain way. Just literally like, name the vocab, put a number in there, and say why you think it's this way. That's very, very, very low-level instructional practices. Okay, but they're common or commonly found. So let's take a look. And I'm going to use Massachusetts as an example. So in Massachusetts, there's less than 2% of students who have no data on them. When you look, and I'm going to use grade 5, so elementary science. Some states will test at grade 4, others at grade 5. I'm going to use Massachusetts, they use grade 5. Grade 5, grade 8, grade 10. So at warning failing, there's 13% of students, and these are the raw numbers. Okay, 13% score in the warning failing for grade 5, 18% at grade 8, and 5% at grade 10. Needs improvement, you see a lot of students have crossed over the line. 37% in grade 5, 40% at grade 8, 23% at grade 10. Proficient, 35% at grade 5, 39% at grade 8, 44% at grade 10%. And then, of course, students scoring in the advanced category, 16% on average for Massachusetts, grade 5, 3% at grade 8, 27% at grade 10. Now, the percentage of students who score proficient and advanced in Massachusetts for grade 5 is only about 50%. However, the state gives itself a grade in the Composite Performance Index of 78.2%. Why is that? So they're giving themselves the grade of almost a B, if we think of it that way, for student performance on the grade 5 standardized test in science. It's because they heavily weight students who score in the needs improvement. They just want students out of warning and failing, really, when they, in terms of how this performance index is structured. So that's an issue. If you move that line over, okay, where you say actually it's the students above proficient that matters, then you do see, students who are in the green zone, okay, before we said students who were okay were above warning and failing, we saw 87%. When you move it, the students who are okay are only 50%. 37% of those kids, almost as many students, are in the needs improvement category as those who are above it. Okay, and so when you look at that performance index now, you can see that really students who are proficient and above, it's overstated by the performance index. So I would encourage you that regardless of what state you're in, that you don't look at the single average performance index numbers, which you'll see in tables like this, okay, with CPI over here, Composite Performance Index 78, but look at the advanced and proficient scoring students is only 51%, okay? You can be lulled into thinking you are in a better position than you actually are as a district. And your instructional practices, the quality of your curriculum, and so on, may be subpar, but it's being masked by this Composite Performance Index. And you can see that at each of these levels. Look at grade 8. State gives itself a 72% or 72-point composite out of 100 scale. Basically a C, but look at, there's barely 40% of the students who are proficient and advanced. Okay, same thing with grade 10. Now what's important is that each of these tests, and this is common too with all the other states, are looking at data, so tests that are testing standards at and below that grade level. So a grade 5 test does not assess standards for grade levels above grade 8. What that means is that it is a different test than grade 8. That only makes sense, right? In grade 10, it's the same thing, and in fact, in Massachusetts, as an example, in other states it's this way as well, it's subject-specific testing that starts to come into play. So to take these numbers, especially CPIs and advanced proficient, whatever, and just add them together and average makes no sense. Yet that's a number that's produced. So this is a misleading number that you see down here at the bottom, this 15. What does that mean? It really means nothing. It's the equivalent of going to the doctor and having them take your height and your blood pressure and your cholesterol and take whatever those numbers are, add them together and give you the average and say, oh, you're healthy. Well, in that case, you could have blood pressure that is dangerous to your health, but it would be masked by the other two factors, which are completely unrelated. Okay, so that's why you have to look beyond these sort of averaging sort of scores that are going on here. They aren't helpful, they're actually misleading. And you don't see student growth indicators on here because the students aren't being tested every year. So that's why you see NA. Okay, that's true of every state almost. Students aren't typically tested in science every year. Okay, there's a couple of exceptions state-wise, but really for most states you have to look at data in a longitudinal sense. We'll take a look at that now. So I recommend that you move your gut indicator away from the index into the raw numbers, okay, the raw data around advanced proficient, needs improvement warning levels, and place it between proficient and less than proficient. So that way there you're focusing all of your district improvement efforts on making sure that students are proficient, that your instructional practices, your resources, your curriculum, your environment all supports that, okay? That means that when these new next generation science standards come into effect, which they are in many states already, or in the process of being rolled out, that that your classrooms are among the best prepared to adapt and to adopt, because they have the best quality of everything in place, okay? What happens is if you leave your sort of gut and focus between warning and needs improvement, what happens is you end up with those worksheets and the drill and kill and the sage on the stage delivering all that content model of instruction and resources, which will be very unhelpful. It's going to be very difficult to uproot from an organizational behavior standpoint. It's going to require a lot of investment in professional development as well as resources to change that. And you have to, because it's not going to deliver the performance in the data, but really it's not going to be delivering students to even the needs improvement level under these new standards. Because remember, the standards of performance expectations, students need to be ready for that. So at a big picture, classrooms that are ready are going to be looking at, look something like this: nonfiction reading, Socratic dialogue, student, full release of responsibility to students for planning investigations in small teams, carrying those investigations out, gathering data, and forming conclusions and debriefing as a class, and kind of rinse and repeat. It's a very simple sort of model, but you don't see anything here that's a home for worksheets or for models or for pre-teaching and students, mirroring back. Okay, authenticity is key. So from a data perspective, what does that mean? Well, when you look at the data, one of the things that you get clues about, in addition to those 4 areas we were talking about, is random shocks. So random shocks tend to manifest themselves in 3 areas. So these are things that you want to be mindful of as you're considering your data and thinking about, gee, why, okay, this is the data, why is it up? Why is it down? Why is it less than, this district or that school in our district or so on? It can be for reasons related to staff changes and teachers, changes in principals, or changes in program or budget. So here are some real examples of clients that we've had, and you can see their demographics down the bottom. So this is a Lincoln Thompson School in Lynn, Mass, where they have over 30% students who are not native English speakers. You have 13% English language learners, 53% are high needs, and 41% are economically disadvantaged. And when we came into the school, you can see that they had significant data increases from 2011 to 2012. And there's some natural change as different student groups come through. So principal is the same, teachers are the same, but the students are different. So from 2012 to 2013, you see a little fluctuation of a few points. That's normal. Populations, especially in elementary schools that only have a couple teachers per grade level, fluctuations of up to 5 points are, just sort of natural up and down. However, when teachers change, such that new teachers come on board and they're not familiar with the program, they may be new to the profession entirely, you can see a shock occurs. So again, students are coming from the same neighborhoods, the principal's consistent, however now there's a new less veteran teacher in a role, and perhaps there's no professional development available, like was the case in this district at this time, and so the teacher has to link up and move on. Now, you can see there's a trend here. It's a positive trend. The students still perform better than they would have without the program in place. However, there's a learning curve that's reflected there, okay, in that dip. But yet when you look at the following year, the teacher's learning curve is, they're getting traction, and you can see the trend continuing here in terms of an increase in advanced and proficient scoring students. okay, and a decrease in the level of needs improvement, okay. Now, in the case of a principal or admin shock, you can see the same sort of thing happening here. So our program came in after the 2008 test year. You see a 12-point gain in students scoring in the advanced and proficient category, and then again in 2010. Consistent teachers in these years, consistent principal, and the demographics of students, they're pulling from the same side of town, same, you know, neighborhoods and everything else. But then there's a change of principal in 2011. Okay, everything else is the same. So you can see the impact of that change of principal, and yet as that principal gets familiar with the program, they're able to, you know, restructure some of their priorities and how they're going on learning walks and so on and so forth, and that performance picks right up where it was before. Now there was a change of administration after that in this district. Okay, there was a new science director, and so there were changes in terms of some of the messaging. Okay, and so you can see the data flattens out and even declines a bit. Program's the same, principal's the same, students coming from the same side of town, but yet there's still a positive trend when you look overall. The level of warning continues to decrease. Okay, now students, what's interesting here is the level of needs improvement is increasing, but again, that's as a result of students leaving the warning, moving to needs improvement, and then moving again over to advanced and proficient. So it is somewhat of a process here. Look at the demographics on this school. Okay, 67% of the students their first language isn't English, 35% are English language learners, 80% are high needs, and almost 60% are economically disadvantaged. So gains despite challenges. Now let's look at a school that is from the same district that has considerably better or more advantageous circumstances than the average district school, or the one we had just looked previously. You can see that the number of students whose native language is not English is less than the average, at only 25%. English language learners less than the average, less than half the average with English language learners, less than half the average of students with disabilities, and less than average high needs and less than average economically disadvantaged. What happened here, the program comes in, okay, they get a data increase, so there's the shock, right, program comes in, then the teacher changes, but you know what, this teacher was used to the program, and so not as much of a learning curve, just a difference in teacher. And then there's a perceived budget cut, and so they test a new program, so the program changes. So that's a program/budget shock. Same teacher, same side of town, same kids, right? And they lose 26 or so points in their advanced and proficient combined. Their needs improvement and their warning increases as a result, right? If the students are not advanced and proficient, then the students are elsewhere, right? They're below that line. And so what's interesting, this is a great example of where that index masks a significant loss of performance. This is a huge shock and decline. Students who aren't proficient are at a disadvantage. They're not college or career ready. They are in need of improvement. Yet when you look at that score from the state's going to add those numbers together and they're going to offset each other, and it's going to be relatively hard to detect. Okay? The only thing is going to be a slight decline because of the students who fell into the warning category. So this could happen again for a year or two until really those students start pushing themselves from needs improvement into warning, in which case they've lost all of their proficiency. They have a glut of students that needs improvement, and then the momentum in the downward direction is sort of taken hold. Now, you have to look at things sort of cumulatively over time. So this is a district, so those schools were taken from this district. You can see that last school, sort of flat performance here in the center. The district average has increased something like 12 or 13 points between 2008 and 2015. And here's all the other schools in that district and how they've performed in that time period. Because what happened is that as we came into the district slowly, the students would large district, urban district would be moving from one school to another because their families were moving, socioeconomic issues, and ending up in new housing or whatever. Teachers would be moving around the district as well, and so there was little point gains here, little point losses, but what is the cumulative effect? So this is one of the questions you want to ask yourself. What is the cumulative effect over time at each grade level in terms of how the data is drifting? So think about it this way, that a school in any given year is going to go up or down, or maintain. We call that going sideways in their data, right? So grade 5, and we want to be specific, grade 5, grade 8, grade 4, okay? Here we're looking at grade 5. Over time, do the ups offset the downs so that schools aren't really going anywhere? There's no drift, no positive drift. Or did the downs offset the ups, in a sense, so that there's a drift downward in the data? Well, when we look at this district, we see a drift upward. Most schools have drifted up in the percentage points gained for students scoring advanced and proficient between 10 and something like 49 points. So that's tremendous, right? Some schools are relatively flat, only 2, and the thing is that's not to say that they have had ups and downs, but over that time period, they've been largely offset, okay? The ups have offset the down. Now, when you look at the state, when you look at the state in that same time period, it's pretty flat too. It's only gained a point or so. Charter schools who were not using the program in the same district, essentially on track with the state average, not really up or down, flat. Neighboring suburban districts have lost points on line with some of those who have been kind of flat or lost a little bit of points. Neighboring urban districts have lost even more. Okay, but you see that district average up 12. These 2 schools have lost a considerable number of points, but that is interesting. So now we have we can ask why on both sides. Why the increase over here? Well, there was investment in a program that had a positive effect. It brought in materials, curriculum, training, which the teachers ran with and the students responded to, and they were in a difficult place in 2008 and have come to a much better place by 2015. When you look over here, you see a couple of schools who were in a better place in 2008, but you have to ask why. Why? Well, leadership has changed. There are different principals. It's perhaps the districting has changed. Also that veteran teachers have retired or gone elsewhere in the district. And so those changes early on, or at some point in this time period, have shocked those schools to such a degree that that they are still in a point of needing to recover, even back to the point of where they were in 2008, because of the changes that occurred. So you can see, the data tells us a lot when we look at it this way in terms of the drift. You also want to look, and again, looking specifically at the advanced and proficient combined in that chart, you also want to look at that sort of raw percentage of students scoring in the 4 categories: advanced, proficient, needs improvement, warning, and then of course combine the number or percentage of students who are in the green zone, that advanced and proficient, right, who have gone over the line. They're not going over a line into needs improvement, but over a line into proficiency. And here's where you can see gains in just a single year from 2013-14 to 2014-15 described. And so you look at these schools, and you see anywhere from 33 points, or sorry, 2 points to 33 points gained for most of these schools, 7 points gained for the district on average at grade 5, just in a single year, in terms of students moving over the line from below proficient to proficient and above. And that is huge, because that's where students become college and career ready. Okay, not advocating every student has to be a scientist. I'm not advocating every student has to go to college. What I'm advocating here is that every student should be prepared so that they have options in life. Okay, and proficiency is what opens those doors. Here's the Massachusetts state average down here. So from that from one year to the next, the state average lost 2 points. A couple of schools tracked with that change. One school was slightly more, lost a couple points more than that. And then, of course, that school that experienced the shock of a different program lost 24 points in the number of students who were scoring advanced and proficient. Absolutely huge, okay, year-over-year change. So before I wrap up, the last piece I want to show you are those platforms. And so we're going to take a look at the issue of sample size, some of the common assumptions, ways of drilling into the data, and some thoughts about item analysis and time series data. So what we're looking at here is time series data, okay? This is cumulative, okay? This here is, so cumulative on a school-by-school basis, and then time series on an individual school basis, okay? Where we can still see positive trends, but yet we see the effects of shocks, and that's really important. The data is only giving you clues. Okay, the data doesn't mean necessarily anything about the student as much as all of the clues about the things that affect performance, some of which are those three things that we talked about in the classroom. Okay, so let me jump over here to those platforms. So depending on what state, and I can only go through, half a dozen states here right now, but if you are from a state that's not being mentioned, please reach out and we'll do the best to kind of connect you up. So if you're from Kansas, you'd go, and this is the type of report you'll find in any state, pretty much. You go to Kansas Department of Education, you look for the K-12 reports. Specifically, you're looking for school and district reports. So in Kansas, you click your county, okay, you'll end up at a school district, and you click on the school, and what you're looking for is the school's report, building report card or so. And so here we are at the report card for 2012-2013 for the New Haven Public Schools. It has all the different demographic data and so on, breakdown to socioeconomic data. And what you're looking for is specifically the science test results, right? So you can find reading, and of course, because science testing doesn't happen at every grade level, and not every school has every grade level as well, that you're going to have to kind of dig a little bit. So in Kansas, science testing takes place first at grade 4. So here we have some grade 4 science data for this particular Haven Public Schools. And you can see one year to the next, and in this case, those advanced students are referred to as exemplary. You can see how the district is performing against the state. Okay, so they've had a decline between 2012 to 2013. It's a significant decline. Now again, we'd have to look at the population of students tested. If we're only testing 10 children, oftentimes if you're only testing 10 or below, the data won't be reported. It'll look something like this, a dash or say NA. But if let's say you were looking at 12 children, one out of a population of 12 is a significant percentage. So sometimes you can see a change like this where it's really just one more or less student that's affected the results. But then exemplary, so exceeds standard, meets the standard, approaches the standard. So this is below proficient right here. This is the line. Approaches standard, warning, and then that's the category here, not tested. Okay, so if you're from Kansas, moving that line means moving the line here to making sure that every student meets the standard or better. Okay, and then states will vary by really how they set the standards. So some states, if you look at their data, it's like, whoa, everybody's meeting the standard 80 or 90%. Well, if you dig into it further, especially, and again, all the data I'm showing you is public data. If you are working on your district data platform as a principal or as a superintendent or deputy superintendent, or even in some states a school board or school committee member, you will have access to data that really drills in much more specifically to how specific students actually are scoring. Here we can't see that for privacy reasons. Okay, but yet we can still see the percentage and really where. So if we wanted to see who is performing the best among students, exemplary, for instance? Is it the economically disadvantaged students? Well, actually, no. You can see there's very few students who are economically disadvantaged who are in exemplary. Okay, most of them you can see are down here meeting the standard. If you kind of go down, you can see in this particular district there's not enough special ed students to report on, or ELL, or African American, or Hispanic, or Asian. So this is a mainly white district. Okay, so if we look at the students who are considered self-identifying as white, you can see they're performing better than the state average. I'm sorry, better in 2013 than 2012. Okay, at the exemplary, there's more of them, but yet exceed standard has fallen, and so on. So this is just an example. Okay, this format of data is not uncommon. It's a little hard to use because you basically have to take this and put it into Excel, but yet it's a PDF, and doesn't lend itself to data analysis. Okay, the same, you can grab more visual version in Kansas as well, here by digging into the report card in a graphic format. And you can see here, this confirms that actually you can see it's 100% white building. Okay, pretty much right down the middle, boys to girls, but yet it's not the most affluent. Half of the students are economically disadvantaged. Okay. Now, if we go to a place like Missouri, you do the same thing. You would go to the Missouri Department of Education, and you'd look for school and district profiles. You come to this area and go into the guided inquiry. Okay, and then you would look at state assessment, and then you would go to the achievement level report, and then you can go through and select the district, how you want that data summarized, for what grade level, what year, what content area, and then how, if you want to look at specific subgroups. So that's what I've done here. Okay, so you can see I'm looking at all the subgroups, those different categories, proficient and advanced, and then below proficient and advanced is down here. So you can look at the data across different disability groups. One of the really interesting ones to look at is boys and girls. So below proficient would be basic in Missouri, or below basic. And you can see that it's pretty much neck and neck, boys and girls. But if you start to look down into different races and ethnicities, we see a different picture. So if we see, okay, where is it that the most students, or where are the best performing students? Well, let's see here. As a population, Asian Pacific Islander, students who identify as Asian or Pacific Islander are performing at advanced at almost twice the rate or more than most other subgroups. Proficient, again, these different groups are mostly neck and neck, but look at this. When we look at advanced and proficient, the least performing group among these subgroups are non-Hispanic students who identify as black, and we can see that there's quite a few of them in this district among the different population groups. Okay, of almost 11,000 who were tested, and unfortunately, over half of those students were below proficient. So half were basic, and almost more than a quarter were below basic. So this is a place where you would look into your data and say, wow, why is this happening? Where, first of all, is it are most of our black students in a specific school? Is it a specific school issue? Is there other deeper issues? Is it a community sort of outreach effort that we need here? Is it sensitivity training that we need at, in specific classrooms? We don't know, but these are questions that we can ask and the data gives us clues where to look. So here we would go and look where these black students are. Like, why aren't they performing anywhere near where their white or Asian Pacific Islander peers are? Okay, and this is a big population of students. See, we could look at something else and say, well, like up here, below basic, the percentage of students who are below basic at the Asian Pacific Islander group versus the American Indian and Alaskan Native group, it's about half. Well, only 1,500 students were tested, and so the difference between 7.4% and 11% is not. Any number of students who are not at proficient is important to look at, but it's not potentially as widespread as some of these other issues. So that's going to take even more digging to get into, and so you have to kind of take percentage changes with a grain of salt, depending on the population size, because remember, the smaller the population, the greater the percentage swing will be as a result of any one member not being proficient or advanced. Okay, and then what's nice here is that Missouri breaks down special program groups too, like ELL, which is English language learners, or limited English proficient, migrant, students on individualized education plans, IEPs, or so on. New Hampshire does something sort of similar. They have a school or district profile at the New Hampshire Department of Ed. You can click into test results. You can go right in. Their test is called the NECAP, and you can go in. They do it at grade 4, grade 8, and so on. You'll see a very sort of familiar platform here, and you can just sort of jump in, grab your grade levels, okay, look at specific subgroups, grab the report for science, and many will even allow you to grab CSV files, which you can start to drill into. So here you can see the data. Now, not as complete, and so we would have to start digging into potentially subgroups individually and so on. So what's unfortunate about these different data platforms, and here's California for the CASP, recent CASP test for science. This is the downside of what you get with data, is unfortunately in some cases not a whole lot. The STAR system was a bit better at giving in-depth data. You can get the research files, which do give you more than this, but some districts or some states will give you more ability to drill into the data on a public side, but on the private side, so for superintendents and principals, they do have that ability to really see granular data. And I'm going to use Massachusetts as an example here in a minute, because they make some of the most, they're really probably one of the most transparent states when it comes to making data public and being able to drill into it. So we'll take a look at that. This is Connecticut's new system. Taking a look at the Connecticut Mastery Test for Science in grade 5, you can see the state against individual groups, and then begin to drill into those districts or counties and look by subgroup. Average scaled score. So what you see here with the scaled score, this is sort of like an SAT score. The kids didn't do 262 test items. It's that, let's say out of 40 test items, each item had a different number of points. So, this is the average point value that students were getting. And then what happens is with scaled scores, a state can move, or sort of what we would call norm, like we were used to maybe in college with grading on a curve, right? They can move the what is considered proficient. And this is one of the more unfortunate things, is that it's not necessarily, proficiency doesn't necessarily mean that you got 80% of the test items correct or something of that nature. What it means is that that on a scaled score, so when all the points were added up, if the state said that students who have 220 points or greater are considered proficient, then students who have that number of points or greater will be considered proficient, or if the threshold for advanced is 240 points, then students over that will be considered proficient, and so on. So it's, again, a little bit of fuzzy math, sort of akin to indexing, but and unfortunately it takes a little more drilling into to find out, again, where those thresholds are being put, which is why when you look at some states, you can see, the state of XYZ, 80% of all our students are proficient, thumbs up, we're great. Well, if you set that bar really low in terms of the threshold of points required to be considered proficient, then you can have 80% of the kids proficient with very few, technically speaking, very few correct answers. So there you go. However, this is a look at Ohio. So Ohio has this great school report card system where you can kind of drill in and look at indicators. Wonderful. You can actually go in and download the data, which is what I really like to do, and really work with it in Excel. So you'd be doing something, grabbing a file kind of like this, where you can drill in, look at the region, particular demographic that you want to look at, and then take a look at the actual grade level, let's say science in this case, proficient and above, and begin to ask those questions. Why is this higher? Why is this lower? Where can, and look to those 3 areas in the schools, but also other shocks, because that's really what's happening there. You can look at gender even, okay, see how girls are performing against boys, and see if there may be issues that need to be addressed, okay. And you can pull that data into Excel and just do some simple, even on a school-by-school basis, something like this, where you pull the data and you start to actually create graphs and look at the time series, okay? And that will give you insight that you can then save and build over time. Now I want to take a look at Massachusetts, like I said, before we kind of wrap up here talking about strategies to get your team around the data and actually not make it something that's punitive and looking at a judgment of one's ability, but really as an opportunity to go and investigate where changes need to be made and training needs to be had and so on. So I am going to go to the school and district profiles for Massachusetts here. I'm going to look at districts, and let's look at a big urban district for Massachusetts. So let's look at Boston, which is right here. I'm going to search that, pulls it up. Here we go, Boston. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look into assessment, because that's whenever you look at one of these state platforms, it's assessment data that you're looking for, right? So here I go into assessment. And this is how the whole district of Boston matched up in all their test areas. Now, just to give you a hint, Boston has about 54,000 students. Okay, state of Massachusetts has about 1 million students. So when we talk about the state is reflecting 1 million data points, and Boston is representing 54,000. Okay, and then of course that breaks down into specific schools that are different sizes. Okay, and also different grade levels. Okay, so depending on the grade, like this particular school only has 37 first grade students. So if we were to look at a first grade piece of data on that school, it's really reflecting testing of 37 students versus others which are larger at 100. Okay, but even for a big city, most of these are little neighborhood schools, which is actually really positive when it comes to the opportunity to make a change, but also really challenging because if administratively there are not common values and good communication that's going to remove barriers and improve those 3 areas that we talked about that we have the most control over, then it's going to be hard to manage change, because you can see the number of schools in this district. It's a tremendous number of schools. Okay, back to assessment. So think about annual comparisons, first of all. So the way that you want to analyze your data with your team is to make annual comparisons. Okay, so you can look at grade level specific as well. You don't want to be taking averages of all the data. Remember, we don't want to take our height and our weight and our blood pressure and our glucose and average them all together. Okay, that's crazy stuff. What you want to do is you want to look at year over year for the same grade and the same building and so on, same school district, and kind of play it out that way. Okay, so here we could look at grade 10 or grade 8, and they may even have a grade 5, and well, I guess we're looking at the district, so they have a grade 5 down here. So grade 5 in Boston, the percentage of students who are proficient is only 16% and 3% advanced, so 19% proficient and advanced. So well below the state average of 50. What we can do is we can compare that to the state average, which we saw on that previous chart here. Okay, so they significantly higher percentage of students who are warning and failing, significantly higher percentage of students who need improvement, significantly lower proficiency, significantly lower advanced. But yet, look at their CPI. Their composite performance index reads at 55 points out of 100. So, well, a 55 is not great. It vastly overstates the only 19% of students who are proficient or advanced. Okay, so that's a problem. So annual comparison. Now, if we were going to be doing an analysis for Boston Public Schools, what we would want to do is we would want to not only look at their aggregate scores, but we want to go in and do some item analysis to see if there's any really obvious things here. So this is, again, looking at a district level. We could go in and drill in school by school. So here we can see that there were 42 items on the science test in grade 5. Some were multiple choice, MC. Some were open response. And they're from all different areas of the standards, life science, earth science, physical science, and so on. And then we can see how students performed. So if you just look at this first item, you can see that the correct answer was D right here, and only 47% of the students were able to correctly answer this. And that includes some students who are guessing randomly. Okay, how many students were guessing randomly? Well, probably about 14% of them, because 14% answered A and B, which were probably completely unrelated to the question. And then a number of students had a hard time differentiating between C and D. Okay, so we can take a look at that question as a released item, and we can see how the question was structured, and that D was the answer, but that there was some confusion. What caused the confusion? Well, probably students aren't engaged in that higher order thinking, right? They haven't developed these practice skills, and so when it came to differentiating between daylight hours and a long period of time, they weren't really sure what to make of that, okay, and its effect on climate and the environment. And so you can see the point of confusion in the item analysis there. So does that mean that we need to go back and change that one piece? Yeah, probably, but you know what? It's showing something much deeper because it's showing that those critical thinking skills are not being taught. So it's a much deeper and probably broader issue as well. So we could and then we can go into open responses. So you can see here 14% of students on this question left it blank, 18% on that one. So they're not even attempting to answer that, which means that they're totally disengaged. They're lost. You can see that most students, so if you start to add in 14%, 28%, who only got 1 point. So of the students who attempted it, a lot of students got sort of credit for trying, partial answer, somewhat of an answer, and actually were fully able to answer the question. Only 4% got full credit for this one question, and 5% got full credit for that question. So it's glaring. The issues are glaring. And this, in this case, points to, again, higher order thinking, but also writing as well. So you have to be able to take your thinking and put it into writing. And that's an issue, especially, again, if you're focused on sort of drill and kill multiple choice. All right. Now, you can drill into schools. In this particular case, we're going to switch over to schools, and you'll be able to see here, we can just take a quick look at the size of this school. So this is a K-5, 550 students. We can look at the assessments. We can see how they perform. Okay, only 4% of students at this school are proficient or above at grade 5 science on their standardized test. If we look at the annual comparisons, looks like there was a shock. You can see it right here. So it doesn't even take us long. Between 2013 and 2014, something major happened. Either a change of administration or a change of program or a change of teachers in such a way that it very negatively, or priority potentially for the district. I mean, that could be another one. It's administrative, a change of priority for the district in such a way that students are really no longer performing at or above proficiency. Okay, and then what's interesting is that that shock doesn't seem to be affecting the other grade levels the same way. And so this may be actually the abandonment of science for maybe ELA and math time on learning. When you look at the other areas at the same grade level, given that this is elementary school, you can see that there was a dip, 2013 to 2014, in both math and in ELA. So this is probably, a grade 5 teacher that's changed, or teachers that's changed, because you actually see improvement here at grade 4. So it's a little hard to tell. We'd have to look into it further, but the two places that we would look first is, was there a change of teachers? And secondly, was there a change of principal or priority for 5th grade? Because a principal with the priority of 5th grade data in other areas improving may say throw out science, and that would manifest something like this, which would be beyond the teacher's control. Or they may say, we need a new program in ELA and math, we're going to throw out science and we're going to do that. Oh, the program in ELA and math didn't work out as well as we thought, and math totally declined as a result of that. So actually I'm looking here that there was a slight increase. I'm trying to make the comparison here. 13, 14, see 13, 14, 13, 14, actually it was a decrease in both. There was some years where there wasn't, it looks like there wasn't a 5th grade in testing. Oh, because of PARC. That's why PARC assessments are not shown here for 2015. So nonetheless, so you can see Massachusetts data, and then you can look into subgroups. Okay, so we can take a look at science and engineering here. Now you're not going to see student growth because, again, remember, these tests are not given every year. You see the CPIs, which are overinflating. I mean, this is just an example of examples. Look at this. Advanced and proficient combined, 5% of students, but yet a CPI of 43. I mean, it's unbelievable. Same thing down here. 10% advanced and proficient, but a CPI of 46. Why? Because the 41% of needs improvement are considered kind of good enough by the index. When this next generation set of science standards comes into play, this is a perfect example of a school that is going to have zeros in here. And it's really unfortunate because clearly the students aren't prepared, but yet they're making probably okay performance against the state. And we can actually look here. They are missing state targets. Okay, they're short of the state targets, but and it's among the lowest performing schools, but they're not level 3 or level 4. So they're still not really reaching the lowest levels despite some pretty low data. So anyhow, so what we have done here is just take a look at some of the data available, things that you want to look at. When you think about engaging your teams in this data, what you want to do is you want to really think about going on a mission together to understand why the data is what it is. Okay, not blaming the students, not blaming anybody, not blaming the teachers, but really going on a journey to understand when you look at things like we looked at a moment ago. Okay, when you see fluctuations in data like this, what is different? Were you redistricted? Was there a new teacher at a specific grade level? Was there a new principal? So what's constant and what's different? So what are the constants, what are the variables? And you have to consider the children, unless you're redistricting, you have to consider the children fairly constant. And because they're going to average out. You're going to have years that are slightly better, slightly worse in terms of sort of the average readiness of students, but that's going to average out over time. As long as you aren't redistricting, as long as you're not pulling from an entirely different side of town, your mix of students is going to be fairly consistent. So you have to look to the other factors. Okay, and so with that, what I recommend that you do is engage your team first and foremost in a discussion of your values. What is it that you're really after as a team? What is it that you care about? Why are you even, why does this data matter? Because if you're all chasing just statistics, it's going to be a very unfulfilling place to work first and foremost. The data is going to go up, it's going to go down, and ultimately the data doesn't really matter because nobody is going to care what a student's score was when they go to college or beyond. However, if the score isn't proficient, a student is going to lack not only the confidence, but they're going to be lacking the skills and knowledge needed to perform on other tests that are relevant, and also interviews and other things to be able to gain entry and basically show that they have the prerequisite knowledge to enter college or even careers. Okay. Last piece I would mention is that when you have that discussion on values, you want to then transfer over to what sort of data gains does your team want to achieve. So what do they think is reasonable achievement for a single year, and what are they willing to, how hard are they willing to work, and what are they willing to work towards? So if they're willing to work really hard, hopefully they are, then there's a question of what resources you need to get there. But beyond that, there's the question of if they're going to work hard, where do they think they can get as a result of that hard work? So to poll the group, and you may have people say, well, we can add 7 points or 10 points or 20 points or 40 points or 33 or whatever it is. Write those all down and then try to narrow it to maybe 4 or 5. Okay, and I'm assuming that you have a group of 20 people. And then give everybody some little colored dots, the kind that you would stick on a mailing envelope to kind of close it, or even little stars, colored stars. Give them 3 each and tell them that they can vote for one or more, or for the same one multiple times, and they have 3 votes with those dots, and let them go up and actually vote for the one that they feel like they can achieve and are willing to work towards. And then as a result of that, look at which data target has the most votes, and then we'll all agree as a team as a result of this process that that's what we're going to work towards. Let the kids know it. Let the teachers know it, and even if the thing is the teachers who are not in years that are being tested support teachers in future years, or they're the beneficiaries of teachers of prior years' instruction. So everybody has a stake in this game, okay? So it's important that regardless of whether it's a test year, everybody is supporting a culture of improved performance and really looking at what this data means and how we can improve on it, okay? So with that, I am going to leave you with my contact information, and if you have questions in terms of simple ways that you can take a look at how the students are doing really well, we've covered a lot of those here, or something specific about the publicly available data for your state, or other questions, feel free to reach out. My email address, fvidgen@knowatom.com, and my telephone number, and this is my direct extension, 617-475-3475, extension 2001, or feel free to respond to any of the emails. I will be sending you, or somebody, if you're on the live session, I'll be sending you a copy of this presentation, video link. If you are viewing this on demand, feel free to reach out if you don't receive a follow-up with a link that you can share with others. You can follow us on Facebook, knowatom.com/Facebook. Twitter, the handle is @knowatom.com. And if you'd like to take a look at any sort of next generation resources or professional development, there's a whole lot of free stuff available under resources section or curriculum section on knowatom.com. And you can also reach out to us. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed this time and wish you well. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.